Hey family, Reverend Russ, super excited to be back again, finally, with the ministry pivot. It took a couple months to just kind of work through some pieces. And obviously, as you all know, shout out to my church, Kingdom Fellowship, and my pastor, Pastor Matthew Watley. We've been doing some work, and so had to pause some of these, but also was able to rethink through some of these. And so super excited about today's episode with Reverend Dr. Brianna Parker from Black Millennial Research. You'll hear more about me talking about her, but also don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to comment. Don't forget to like. Don't forget to share wherever you are watching or wherever you are listening to Ministry Pivot. Don't forget to follow on IG Ministry Pivot or at sign rather Ministry Pivot, and also at sign Reverend Russ. Don't forget to follow me as well. Super excited about all of the resources that we have coming up, all of the episodes we have coming up. We have Dr. Parker today. I have a dear friend of mine as well. Dr. Parker's a dear friend, but I also have another dear friend of mine, Reverend Dr. Heber Brown, coming up in a couple weeks. And then I have some others that are coming in. So super excited about that. Don't forget to go to ministrypivot.com for more information, for the articles. Big shout out to Outreach. We are actually to Outreach, but also really big shout out to Givelify, because we are working on several partnerships right now, and working on articles and working on ways to help impact pastors, impact churches, impact communities. And you all know Givelify is a great resource and tool. There's actually a new update to their tool that they recently released. And so I would encourage you to go to Givelify.com so you can learn more about that. And actually, one of my latest articles is out talking about ministry and strategy, and you can find that on Givelify even this week. And you can find that, of course, on my website, Ministry Pivot, but really just talking about how important it is to strategize in ministry, and some thoughts on ways you can use the Givelify tool to help you do that, to help you reimagine and rethink. Also started this week, last week rather, started a 5-minute pivot. And so make sure that you check some of those out. Super excited about that. But before, actually, let's just go ahead into my conversation with Reverend Dr. Brianna Parker. Super excited about her. She is trained in more than head and heart. She has a ton of degrees. She is a researcher. She was actually one of the lead researchers, I believe the lead researcher for the Barner Trends in the Black Church study that is actually out now, that I was blessed to be a part of. But Dr. Parker and her team actually dealt with the data there, and actually dealt with the meaning of it, and how it was helpful to kind of interpret it, along with Barner, along with several other people, several other organizations that were a part of it. And inside our pivot today that you're about to see, she and I have conversations about the importance of data in the church, and the importance of data more specifically in the Black church. So go ahead and get ready. Hopefully you are as excited as I am. Don't forget, there's always show notes, but you'll hear more about that. Let's go now to the conversation with Dr. Parker and I. Welcome, Ministry Pivot. This is Reverend Russ. I am super excited to have you join us today or tonight or this morning, whenever you're watching, or if you're listening on to the podcast. I'm so excited that we have Reverend Dr. Brianna Parker with us on today. We're going to talk through what it means to have data in the church and research in the church. But beyond that, she's here. You can see her. So let's go ahead and I'm thankful, Dr. Bree, for you being with us. Super excited. First, thank you.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure.
Awesome.
I'm glad to be here.
I want to, for those that don't know about Reverend Dr. Brianna Parker, I just want you to share a little bit about the Millennial Cafe, share a little bit about your time. Well, let's share a little bit about your time in ministry first. How did you start in ministry?
Yeah, so I actually started in ministry. Unfortunately, God called me right when I got to college, so it kind of messed up my college life, you know. And I was in Phoenix, Arizona, then going to Arizona State, and I really wanted to be a lawyer. I never expected to do it full time.
Okay.
Fast forward after seminary and a whole lot of tears, and I did it. I started to do it full time. I started as a chaplain.
Okay.
And then my sister actually was in Texas, in Dallas, dying slowly, but she was diagnosed with end-stage renal failure.
Okay.
And so instead of doing full-time ministry in Phoenix that I was about to go into, I decided to go to Dallas. That's when I started to work at Friendship West as the pastor of assimilation, which was something that was totally new.
Okay.
And it was also odd, at a justice church to assimilate. That was weird.
Yeah.
And so I started ministry. I mean, of course, I did things in seminary, but like for real, full-time ministry started in a mega church when I was 25 years old.
Wow.
And I was the only woman on staff.
Wow.
And I had so many things to work through,
sure.
just to begin ministry and, to grow and grow, because you're young, so you're really growing up. You don't hear women grow up in ministry like that, not at a young age. Unfortunately, we get opportunities when we're much older. So that's how I started pastor of assimilation, kind of figured out what I wanted to do from there, started to grow and innovate and make adjustments. And honestly, when I started consulting, a lot of what I used were rejected ideas from my church when I was in that position.
Really? Okay.
And I literally had a notebook of rejected ideas that I started my consulting with.
Yeah. Well, I know, so I want to stick on the assimilation for a second, because I think it's super important for us to understand and know that assimilation is needed. Because people don't automatically come in to the fold. And so I'm going to come at the assimilation in a second, but I also want to, because I think, or I assume, and I could be wrong, that some of that assimilation is actually what may have also sparked your interest in data and some of the research. Because I think the two go hand in hand a little bit. But what I do want to say, to a point that you just said about learning quick. I started at the Empowerment Temple several decades ago, and it was a large church, and you kind of get thrown in, and you have to just kind of figure some things out. Shout out to both our pastors there, and super shout out to my pastor now, Kingdom Fellowship, Reverend Wiley. That's my guy. But the point is that you do grow more in ministry as you serve.
Oh yeah.
You do grow more in ministry as you serve. You do learn more in ministry as you serve. And to your point, you have a ton of ideas. You have a ton of things that you want to get done. And some of the things are things that God wants you to do, and we're going to talk about the Millennial Cafe in a minute, and not necessarily ministry pivot, right? It's one of the things that I'm doing, and shout out again to my church, but it's not a part of Kingdom, but it's something that my pastor wholeheartedly supports and loves the fact that I do. But I do want to ask you about the assimilation and how you got started in research. Do the two of those things match a little bit, or not really?
No.
Not really.
No. So I was doing assimilation, and I just realized one thing that I would hope every pastor would know today is that don't give anybody a position without giving them the resources to do it successfully.
Okay.
So when I was trying to do assimilation, we were headed toward the era of, like, as far as mega ministry, like kiosk and like being able to hold data and know what you were doing and figure out kind of like the profile of the person who was, whose data you were entering, and those kind of things. And I remember not having the resources I needed, but understanding, because of Fellowship One, Fellowship Church is in Dallas, so understanding what it could really look like. But that's not how I got in, but that is how I knew I wouldn't be able to do it successfully.
Okay.
The lack of data and profiles that I couldn't hold on to. And so I actually got into data accidentally.
Okay.
I never wanted to do anything like that, but I was at Baylor working toward a PhD in church state studies. I went to religion and policy. I wanted to be a commentator on MSN, and kind of navigate between the two spaces. And I got into a really bad accident, and I have permanent spinal damage now, and I was less than 2 inches away from decapitation. Wow. And Freddie Haynes, who was my supervisor at the time, comes to the ER. And we're talking about it, and we don't really know what's wrong with me, but we're sure life is going to change. And I couldn't make the 3-hour round trip drive anymore. So he said, consider Virginia Union. I was like, and get a D-man? He was like, yeah. I was like, God ain't got me to do no D-man, And so he was like, I have a D-man. I was like, sorry. You know what I mean? I got what I want. But I went there. And although I was still in a PhD program, working toward a PhD, and I was at Virginia Union, I could only read 10 pages at a time because I had a concussion as well. Wow. And so they loved me through it. And when it was time to do my project, I was like, I'm going to create curriculum for young adults. That's my context. Friendship West is more than 50% 40 and under. So this makes sense. And they were like, we don't have any data. You can't do anything without data. You can't create that curriculum. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll just go find some. So, I tried to find some. Went to Pew, nothing. Went to Barna, nothing. Of course, Gallup wouldn't even be interested in that kind of work. So I had to make a decision. Was I going to either change my project or was I going to create what didn't exist? And I was like, oh, I'm not begging anybody for anything. You think I'm going to go to Barna and beg them for data? You think I'm going to Pew and begging them? No, I'm going to do it. So I called my friend who's an experimental psychologist and said, can you supervise my work? And I took a couple classes, and yeah, that's literally how I started. And I didn't think anything of it, and I didn't think anybody cared.
Yeah.
But word got out, and people would say, hey, can you make sure you ask about this? Or, hey, can you do that? And I was like, okay. So then they would say, can you come and talk to my staff? Can you come and talk to my denomination? I'm like, okay. And then, can you consult? And I was like, well, I don't know what it is, but if you tell me, okay. Like literally, I just kind of walked into it. And after getting the data on Black millennials, I was the only researcher to have extensive quantitative and qualitative data on Black millennials and faith. And after that, I realized we just had a deficit in the Black community of data.
Yeah.
And at that point, I knew how. I had hired my friend to be the lead consultant. You know, I just didn't have a reason not to do it. So I kept learning until I could hire more researchers and stop doing the data part of it. So I don't analyze anymore.
Okay.
I'll look at it and translate it, but I don't analyze anymore. And I still do survey design, though.
Okay.
And so we just kind of accidentally stumbled upon you know, this kind of like hole. It was just a deficit that something that just didn't exist.
Yeah, no, and let me say, I know from being in youth ministry before this for decades, and knowing that a lot of it didn't look like us.
Oh, no.
And the reason it didn't look like us was because and I said it before when I wrote my first book, I said it, that it needed, and it got turned down from almost every publishing place until I then sold what was their quota, and I did that, and then it was like, okay, well now we want you, but I didn't want to at this point because but there wasn't enough of us writing, and I truthfully believe that's still the case, and there's not enough of us doing the research because the data is important.
It is.
Right? Because, and that's one of the questions that I have. I tried to be professional and send some notes because she's a doctor and I'm not, and that's one of the things is, can you help us understand the importance of research in the church, but I want to qualify it even better in the Black church.
Yeah, I mean, well, let's talk about in the Black church. You know, the difference in data, right? Yeah. So when we were talking about millennials, we were using white church data. Yeah. And we were totally off, right? We're wasting our resources to go after problems that do not exist. Yeah. Let's also start by saying the problem with generations is not Black people problems. You know, it's very Western. Yeah. We've been living with 3 generations in a household, and all of a sudden we're like, I don't know how to talk to somebody else that's not in my generation. Yeah, you got up every morning to talk to your grandmother. You know what I mean? Like when your mother came home from work, you talked to her. Like, this is not really our issue. Yeah. But because we looked at their data for so long, we kept hearing their stories from their data, we really adopted something that didn't belong to us. That's the problem with not having your own data and using data for a demographic that doesn't really match yours. And so people were spending resources, literally going for broke, you know, because they said this or we got to do this and we go buy all this stuff. And so that's one thing. It's also important that Black churches have data because you can't go to the bank with anecdotal information. Yeah. When it's time for you to get a loan, when it's time for you to write these grants, white churches have data that's just, you know, there, and we don't have that. And so when we go to try to level up in ways that are necessary and appropriate, we don't have the information we need. And so that's why we went from doing like Black church to Black church and community, because it just, we also need community data in order to get grants and things like that. And it's the best way to really not waste your resources. I tell people, let data and discernment, you know, get you to your destiny. It doesn't have to be one or the other. And so whenever you're using data, you have a better chance of hitting your target. You don't have to waste resources and try to figure out over and over and over again. I mean, don't get me wrong, I do A/B split tests, right? On the things I do. Let me do the testing. You know what I mean? Like in a very sophisticated way with technology. And then I deliver a product to you that you don't really have to do that. Like when you get my curriculum, you don't have to fix it to match your demographic. You know what I mean? Like, it's made for Black young adults. When you read a book, you don't have to go and sprinkle Lowry's on it. Like, it's ready, it's seasoned, it got the sauce. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. But we didn't do that for years. We were buying curriculum. I think mine is like $150, and you know that is very cheap. When we were buying everybody else's curriculum, we were spending $1,000, $1,500, hundreds of dollars.
And still have to edit it to match us.
Right. You know, it's just so much work that we put into it because people weren't concerned with us. And that was just the thing. People were like, oh, you have so much success and, you know, God is really good. And I promise you it's a God thing. And I also promise you I'm most the most financially stable I've been in all my adult life. I won't
Yeah.
pretend like, you don't make no money
Yeah.
working for the church at 25. Like, that's
Yeah.
just not, like, you're a rookie,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
But, so I won't pretend like this is not beneficial to me.
Yeah.
But I really want people to know that I could take this somewhere else and make a lot of money quicker. But I do it this way because I know that my community needs it, and I don't want someone else to come in and do for us what we could do for ourselves, number one. And number two, I just found like literally a deficit, a hole that needed to be filled, and now I'm not gonna give it up. That's it.
No, that's good. And I think, and I'm pivoting, ministry pivot, to talk with the pastors and the leaders. Like I don't want them to miss what you said on the grant piece of it, but on the data and discernment piece of it.
Yeah.
Right. At the end of the day, there's ministry stuff. So you're trying to figure out, how do I do after school programs, or I have a lot more, and it may not be single mom, but it may be some moms who are working extra. But if you have that data in your church, that makes you more appealing when you go to the bank or when you go to the grant, because you're not just saying, I think, you're actually, and it's your people. I know at our church, shout out again, Kingdom Fellowship, we do a survey that's large. We get a couple thousand people to fill it out every year. And so we know where our demographics are. We know what the needs are. And that helps us as a ministry team do the work. But there are things that you can do, and I just don't want you to miss what Rev Bree said, that there are things that you can do that will enhance your ministry.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think that's a key, that for so long we just go Sunday to Sunday, or Monday to Sunday, just kind of guessing. I'm gonna do the preaching, I'm gonna do the singing, but there are ministry components that you can, and the demographic stuff of who's coming into the community. Right? And that shifts.
Absolutely. Oh, it definitely shifts. Like, sometimes I go work with people and they're like, we want young kids, and we go do some market research, and we're like, oh, sugar, you ain't never gonna get no kids here. You know what I mean? Like, it's just not not in your radius. Like, there's no schools, right?
Yes.
And it's like buppies, right? Black yuppies who have a lot of money. They're not at the age where it's time to have children. You know what I mean? And when they do, they're leaving this neighborhood. You know what I mean? Like, this is just what they're doing so they can get really good Uber Eats, be in the middle of everything. But when they're ready to raise a family, they won't live here. You don't have grandparents who have children. Who do you have here, that we'll work with? And I have people all the time like, help us get millennials. Millennials are never coming here. You don't have any colleges, around here. You don't have any jobs. It's not a thriving community. But you have seniors, and that's what you need. You work with who you have. And so when you're actually looking at your data, and I tell people you can look at national data too. I mean, when we did the latest study, we had rural churches, you know what I mean? We had urban churches, we had small churches. Everyone can do data. You may not be able to assess it as well as you should, but you can do it. And so we're actually doing assessments and surveys. We're gonna have a full store full of surveys and assessments, because I realize I'm telling people do the work, and they don't know where to start. So I'll give them the tools.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I want to ask you, so about the last, I know the State of the Black Church. Was that the right title? What's the right title?
It's the State of the Black Church.
So the State of the Black Church. I want to ask you, what's something in the survey that surprised you? What's something that when you got the data back and you analyzed it, it surprised you about what it said?
Well, let me say that the project was a surprise.
Okay.
I wanted to do research on the Black church. Barner wanted to do research on the Black church.
Yeah.
We both had limitations.
Okay.
It cost about $300,000 to $400,000 to do research like that. I had a financial limitation.
Okay.
They had a reputation and relationship limitation.
Okay.
And so, like, literally, I think I met David, who's their president, and like I call him my BFF. Like in October, and by December we were like, okay, we should do this project.
That's good.
And they weren't trying to control it in a way that would make it worthless.
Yeah.
Because they can control it so that it's worthless. So there are kind of two things, but one thing that I would have never even imagined, because I felt like it was more white. We had this time where we're talking about identity. Like, it's an area we're talking about identity. And, most people say, I'm spiritual, I'm not religious,
Yeah.
So we asked the question if they were religious and not spiritual. And I was like, this is stupid. This is not black people, right?
Yeah.
And I must say there are a number of questions that I was like, brush your shoulders off. That's what happens when you research, right?
Yeah.
And then I looked at gentrification, and nobody cared about gentrification and congregations. So, which told us we needed to educate, right?
Yeah.
But when I looked at that, and 11%, I think, of the people said that they were religious and not spiritual, and they were black, I was like, what is that? What in the world? When did we start talking like this?
Yeah.
And I didn't understand. I didn't understand it. Now, for white people, it's a higher number, right? That's something they understand. But what happens is people marry people, and one may be a person of faith and one isn't.
Okay.
And they're willing to allow the baby to be dedicated. That's religious and not spiritual.
Yeah.
Or, it's like, I don't mess around with church, but you better funeralize my grandmama in the church. Like, let's go find me a church, you know. So, like, you have these religious practices that you want to participate in, or you're willing to allow your children or your family, but you're not really buying into the faith. You know what I mean? It's the function almost more than the faith.
Yeah.
And so that was really surprising to see it at 11%.
Wow.
I never imagined black people would talk like that or even publicly identify in that way.
Yeah.
And they did at 11%. 11% is not that low.
Yeah, okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, if we look at the fact that we've had so many changes, like we got to see a number of changes in it, like political affiliation. We were headed toward Republican, our age and under, and not anymore because we had that 4 years of a nightmare. So it started to change back, and we're not identifying toward, even the bougiest, you know what I mean? Like, buppies don't want that anymore.
Yeah.
So we've seen a lot of changes, but that religious versus spiritual was something I never imagined to see black people doing.
Now let me just, so my minister mindset, right, the operations mind is saying with that question. I saw the survey as well, and I'm gonna link everything that we talk about in the show notes, so you'll be able to get it. Obviously, be able to contact Rev Bree. But with that one, right, that to me though means it's an opportunity.
Oh, it's absolutely
for
an opportunity.
churches to be able to dig in and help bring back the understanding of the need of church beyond just the function of church. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but the problem is when we see people come, like a baby blessing, that's also religious, not spiritual. Like, I may come as part of your community, right? And I'm going to do whatever you say, but I'm not really checking for the rest of this.
Exactly.
And if we would, as church people, preachers, pastors, stop assuming that just because someone is present, you know what I mean, that their presence is purposeful for what you consider, you know, like that they should be there. Like, so if you come to a baby blessing, we say, oh, look at all these people who love God and are going to raise these people in the church. It's not true.
No.
You know what I mean? Like, people who insist on having a church funeral. What does that mean? A church wedding? That means nothing either. Like, we need to stop making the assumption that if they walk into the building that they have bought into whatever it is. And we need to actually treat everyone like we need to win them to Christ. Yeah.
And I think what that means then is that you need to have systems and formats, and I'm sure, Rev Bree, you talk about, but I know I did it at youth ministry. I know I do it at my church now, where there's not a service or a worship opportunity where we don't, one, expect guests, and we don't, two, have something for them to do next. Right?
Yeah.
A way to be, and it may be small. It may just be, here's last week's sermon. It may be, here's our prayer call. It may, but there has to be a next step, because if you don't do it, nobody else does that to us, right? Like iPhone don't do that to us.
No.
McDonald's, well, nobody does that to us. But the church,
the grocery
we do that.
store, the smallest thing you do, you know what I mean? Like, they want to capture your information. And now that I do data, I'm like, no. You know what I mean? I don't want you to have my data. Don't think like that toward me, though. Give me your data.
That's funny.
But yeah, we don't make those assumptions. We don't even value an email list.
Yeah, which is tough, which is wild, because how else can you, if what we want at the end of the day is the gospel to get out everywhere, right? And even those who aren't clergy, you aren't a pastor, but you still have a ministry that God, and I believe all ministry is God ordained, and you still have, so if you don't have a way to contact those people, then you can keep talking to yourself. If I did Ministry Pivot and I didn't have a website, didn't have a mailing list for you to sign up and to follow, it would just be me talking with a friend and paying for cameras and lights.
Yeah.
Like that would be it.
And you cannot pivot without the ability to communicate with your people.
Exactly. That's good.
You know what I mean? Like, so all these changes people want to make, and they're going to do this. Like, no. Yeah. And part of the other thing when we talk about like email list and communicating, data is also important because right now we don't get to shake hands and hear the problems of our people. We used to be, first of all, we were delusional as preachers to think that at a certain level you really stay that connected to your people unintentionally. You don't unintentionally stay connected. I ask my friends like, oh really, how much is a gallon of milk? And it always pisses them off, and I'm like, don't get up mad at me that you don't know what's happening in your community. You know what I mean? Because you just gotten so comfortable, and we get pulled so many directions that we have to be intentional about knowing what's happening in our own communities. Like it doesn't come easy anymore at some point. And so you're not shaking hands. You're not in the community. You can't talk to people the same. They can't really just access you the same when they just want to tell you about their issues. So surveying is like really how you keep your ear to the ground. You know what I mean? Like that's the only way right now.
And the fact that you can do it, and we can do it as the Black church because we have the trust that nobody else has.
Oh, let me tell you.
Because of the function that we provided for the grandmama and the great grandmama. And those are things that I think we miss. That those are key pieces for the church.
I think it's so funny when I work with people, even when we did State of the Black Church, we did a collections, agency to collect the data or whatever. And I don't have those issues. Like I don't have a problem getting people to trust me enough to do focus groups and in-depth interviews and trust, their anonymity with me and surveys and things like that. And like, that's just not my issue. And so we're actually going to open up a collection agency because it's so easy for us because people believe in us. But you have to have enough integrity. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's what we've seen in the Black church. The Black pastor is still, based on what statistics say from our latest study, the most trusted or the most trusted authority in the Black community. And it's because of the work of the Black church. It's probably not the work of pastors. If I'm honest. Pastors have erred in some ways that would make people not, but the institution and the legacy of the Black church is what keeps the Black pastor with the most amount of authority in the community.
And the fact that we were talking off camera before about social media and how it's impacted churches, and for some churches with those pastors who haven't kept the standard the way they ought to, because we're all human, we all mess up, we all have issues, but you have another weight on you when you're a pastor, when you're a leader, and so I think that's key. But one of the things that I think for the pastor, for the leader, when it comes to the data and the trust, is the fact that every year you don't use it, I think it then puts you more out of touch. Than you would have been. And so having that consistent rhythm, because we do it every Sunday, right? And now, moving into this next year of this pandemic and us kind of figuring what's going to happen out, I miss being able to look out in the congregation and see so-and-so like that. That's data collection, right? I'm saying I know that, and if they're not, then but you don't have that because it's not the same thing online when they're typing and chatting. Now there's some ways to do it. There's some ways that we are able to kind of be creative. But
let's be honest, we have not found the way of doing it virtually.
No.
Whatever else people want to say, they haven't found it. You know what I mean? Like some people are like, I call all my members. Well, you could also put them in the bathroom probably, if you have time to call. Like I have somebody who says, I call my members twice a week. That is really good. That's not the same for, like, most people couldn't do that same thing. You know what I mean? Like at 100 members, you're not calling all them in 1 week because you're going to lose something. You know what I mean? If you do that.
And if you call them, the quality, so like our church, we're reaching out to them, but the quality of it. So now we're doing, smaller groups, so that somebody, so it may not be the pastor, it may not be the assimilation pastor, it may be somebody else, but somebody's laying eyes to be able to do that because it's important. It's just different in our context.
It is. And we can lie easily over the phone. You know what I mean? Like, how you doing? I'm all right, but how you doing in your face after a sermon? You know what I mean? You're going to get a closer version of the truth, you know? So and don't get me wrong, if you can call all your members, I think that's amazing. But let's be honest, that's still not the replacement for being able to see them and touch them.
Nothing's going to replace physical touch. The thing about this is, and I wrote a couple articles on this with Barner, and then I wrote a couple with Givelify. Shout out Givelify. But it's nothing is going to replace physical, right? But we have to move to the place where we know when we are able to go back, and some level of us are going back now in person, we can't lose the other.
Shout out to the Delta and Lambda variants who said that's not a good idea. It's definitely a tough space to be in. But
we do go back and we go back to whatever level is full or whatever level is more,
which will be different.
My fear is that I wrote a thing recently on hybrid. I don't think I think some churches are going to abandon the online.
They told me they
and go back as if you can forget about this whole year and the benefits of it.
Yeah.
I was telling a friend the other day, everything has gotten better. So regardless to how much you like your restaurant around the corner or your Lowe's, not Home Depot, but regardless to how much you like any of those, they've all gotten better. Now you can Best Buy, I can order from my car, pick up, park in a spot. How has the church gotten better? That's what churches have to ask themselves in this season, because we should have gained some too.
Absolutely. I think, I keep telling people, you won't really know what can remain until we're completely open again.
Yeah.
There'll be businesses who won't fail until they open again.
Yeah.
And there'll be churches who won't close until they open again.
That's good.
I have people who are telling me now that they're going back, they're going to abandon all that technology. Yeah. And I have a risk assessment, like, don't go in yet, don't worry. And some of them I just want to tell don't go in because I know what they're going to go back to when they go in. And that's just, it's so disappointing, It's like God would call you out of an area only for you to go back into the very thing that was probably hurting you.
Yeah.
I also think that we should think about collaborating a little more and maybe
other
some churches consolidate.
Well, I'm a fan of that. I'm a fan. I do think that there are churches that God has been kind and you have a great history. But it may need to shift in some ways. But I think it also is on pastors to be willing. And I've never been a pastor. I'm not trying to belittle pastors. Shout out to all the pastors. But I do think that there may be some more creative ways to make more of an impact when you look at other opportunities within the community. I think that's a key thing.
I've consulted with churches who aren't a church anymore.
Wow.
They're a social service center because that's what they were doing. They were doing well.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't be able to stay open as a church. They just wouldn't have it.
Yeah.
But as a nonprofit operating as giving social services, they are thriving.
Wow.
But it takes a whole lot of humility in order to do that, and I've probably only done it 3 times.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's wild. Let me ask you. So I asked you what surprised you. Let me ask you what did not surprise you. What's one of the things that did not surprise you from the study? And again, we'll link the study in the show notes where you can reach it and you can download it. And we'll also link Rev Bree's information with all of the surveys that she spoke about that you'll be able to get. And
not only that, we're already in pre-sale for the print. So I think
cool.
I put it up, the print pre-sale, and by the time they see this, it'll be a bundle for download and print that we'll do too. So
I'll link all of this in the show notes, whether you're watching or listening. You'll link that. But what did not surprise you?
What did not surprise me was the way Black people lie about church attendance.
Please explain.
Child, they was like 51% of us, I think, go to church every week.
Every week. Yeah.
And it was a very small percentage who said they hadn't been in 6 months. And I'm just like, y'all lying. But so I wasn't surprised because, we usually outpace. Now, look at the study because there is a little dip that you see, a little difference between Latinos now and Black people. But I also believe that's politically related.
Okay.
They're identifying stronger as Christian, while Black people, I think 3% difference. I think Black people are identifying a little less as Christian. But I think it's not about being Christian. It's about being what kind of Christian. I don't want you to think I'm the red hat wearing Christian. So now we're how's the identity work? Can I get a new name? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think, that's the real issue. So Black people always usually outpace everyone else in spiritual disciplines.
Yep.
So I expected that even though I knew they were lying, I expected them to lie about that because we do want to be seen as spiritual and attending church and still committed to faith practices. So I expected to see that. Now, the way you make that work for you is you realize that if this is the way people are willing to be seen, they're probably willing to participate at this level too, if you give them something to participate in that feels worth their time and valuable.
Yeah, I saw that in the study too, that it marked that African Americans just outpaced everybody else when it came to spiritual. And I think...
And have always.
But I also think when you think, and we were on a call with Bonner about that, and the comment that came up, and you probably made it, and I agreed and stamped on it, was that we have more to believe in a God for.
We do. And we've never been able to let go. You know, I'm not trying to be funny, but like the hardship for African Americans, you know, like never lets up. Even when we think, you know, our head is above, you know, we're gonna be able to rise above the struggle, you know, something else new comes, and not new, right? Like different forms of it. Like they hadn't stopped beating us, you know, but then the camera lets us see it all over again. So yeah, we ain't had a choice. Yeah. We ain't been able to walk away from God. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, maybe we'll be having, you know, maybe our numbers will be just like white people if we could have some different kind of life. But as long as America is still America, we're gonna outpace the rest of the country in spiritual discipline.
Yeah, it's gonna be tough. So before we wrap, I want to ask the question on how, just tell me about the Black Millennial Cafe. Tell me about the surveys that you mentioned, some that you, as you're sitting there, like I know we talked, but I didn't know you did some of this stuff. So educate me as well, just of the breadth of what you supply, and then how people can, because I really do think that beyond Rev Bree being a friend, I do think that she has a resource that will help churches make impact. You're trying to figure it out when there's someone that has a opportunity for you to take advantage of, to be able to use the data in your congregation, in your setting. Because I know for us as a church, I said it before, we don't do, I mean, obviously we're led by the Holy Spirit. My pastor leads us, but we use data a lot. And I think it's made us a better church because we use it in specific ways. So again, help us understand some of that.
Yeah, so Black Millennial Cafe started off just doing, you know, just trying to help churches and organizations with healthy engagement for Black millennials. Then it went from Black millennials to emerging generation. Now we've worked with political organizations, politicians, worked on gun violence data, creating that data. I served as a lead researcher for Barna State of the Black Church Study. And then we consult, we create. But, you know, honestly, we do so much, Russ, because we don't have no choice, because there's nobody else doing it, you know? Yeah. And so we keep finding a new department, and we're like, okay, now you have to be over there to give us all the stuff we need. Yeah. And so, now we are doing assessments and surveys. We have a subscription program, which is like the thing I'm most proud of, I think, right now. Okay. People just couldn't afford to hire us as consultants. $3,000 to $7,000 a month, right? And you have to have a contract that's 3 months or more. And so I was just like, oh, this doesn't feel great, because what's my reasonable service? You know, God has benefited me this way and blessed me in so many ways. But, you know, like, there's only so many people who can do this. So then I started webinars, right? And I felt like that was a good way to give people data and model and solutions to the challenges we would see in data or whatever we would find. And then I was like, ugh, but that doesn't feel like enough. Like, I don't know that I've given enough in accessibility, you know, like to be able to access the data. So the subscription program is a webinar and a PDF at the first tier.
Okay.
A webinar, and this is published and unpublished data that we're sharing so that people can, like, you know, fix the issues in their context or know what's coming down the pike. The second tier gives you webinar, PDF, group coaching with other pastors around the country. Third tier, webinar, PDF, group coaching, and we create a very innovative worship service for you. So one time a month, you don't have to think about what you're gonna do to be innovative. Okay. And then the next tier is all those things plus a custom worship service. So you can be like, it's my anniversary, plan our anniversary this month. So we did this, and I'm really proud of it because, first of all, that I didn't think I deserved only these huge contracts, $70,000 contracts, but I also believed I had a reasonable service to give, and we worked out and put a whole lot of money into making sure we could give people what they needed. The other thing is, I think when you're pastoring, you don't kind of know what to teach next. Like sometimes, you know, look, I gotta be honest, anybody who's leading anybody knows it's like, What I'm gonna teach them this time? What do we have to talk about this month? What's coming down the pike? And you have to do a lot of work to stay on top of it. Well, since we're looking at the data, let us stay on top of it.
That's
so
good.
1 month we're doing youth, and another month young adults, another month Christian education, pastoral care, hybrid ministry, digital discipleship. So we're figuring it out, and we pretty much do. It's almost like we're training your staff every single month.
Yeah.
And so that's probably what I'm most proud of right now, but I'm really excited to be able to release assessments. I love consulting, with churches. It may be one of my favorite things to do. It's just not realistic that you have enough time after a while to do it for everybody. Yeah. But I still believe in the Black church is merch that really did well. And then after looking at the data, I decided I was going to name my book, I Still Believe in the Black Church.
Yes.
And so I wanted people to know clearly, because people are like, she hate the Black church. I'm like, you've never heard me if you believe I hate the Black church.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to kind of like look at where we are and where we're going, and what pivots we need to make in order to be successful in ministry in the book. So there's always something, a children's book we're releasing. It's always something we're doing.
Yeah.
What happens is we see data.
Yeah.
And we say, oh, this is a problem. We can't let this problem exist like this for this long. How do we feel this problem? The reason the children's book is coming out is because we get to see that the time in life when people appreciate church most is children's ministry and youth ministry, because there's intentional programming. And so if that's the time you can catch people best, and that's the time that you have their attention, let us create something that helps churches to do this easier and a little better. And so that's literally, we don't create any product that we don't see a need for, like in data, like for the future. Now, it may be ahead of its time, but it's definitely in time, if that makes sense.
No,
we
good.
don't create things and hope people want it or try to convince them we'll want it. We almost create it and wait until they see how much they need it.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So I know I'm going to link all of the kids' book may not be out by then, but I'm going to link everything else that you have. But for those that are maybe driving and listening, just say the website one time so that they know it, they can remember it in their head, and then they'll go get the show notes later.
Sure. I run BMC.com, like I run Black Millennial Cafe.
Yeah.
I run BMC.com. You can buy the report from the Barna State of the Black Church study. You can buy assessments, surveys, pre-order the book. You can buy merch. You can do consulting. You can do packages on assimilation. All the stuff is there. If you want to survey your own congregation, if you want us to survey your congregation, we do congregation surveys. We do community surveys so that we can help get people on the right track. So it's irunbmc.com.
That's awesome. Well, I'm excited. I hope that you all got the nuggets that Reverend Bree laid out. But more importantly, I hope that you're going to go to the website, irunbmc.com. I hope that you're going to talk with your leaders, talk with your staff, talk with your pastors about talk with your pastor if you're a clergy or your congregation, be respectful, but talk with them in a way about, how do we take advantage? How do we know and plan ahead? Everything else in life has a plan to it. Everything else that you interact with today had a plan to it. This podcast had a plan to it. When you went to McDonald's, there was a plan to it. And the church should be the same way. And so hopefully that really is my prayer, that you see that and know that, as I've always said through all of the podcasts, that with Ministry Pivot, this is not just a season of disappointment or just a season of discouragement. This is literally a season of opportunity. And I believe that if we really engage the data that God has given us, really use, I love that term, data and discernment, that we'll be able to move forward and make impact, not just for who we know, but even for those that are outside of who we know. And that really is my prayer. Again, Rev Bree, thanks for being with us on today. Super excited about all that God is doing in your life and the life of the ministry there. So super excited to hear more about that and have you back when we talk about some of the other pieces that you have going on. And again, just a big shout out to our partners with Givelify, and a big shout out to Outreach as well. Just super thankful for them. And if you need to follow us, all of the platforms are there. Looking forward to seeing you next time as you pivot in ministry, knowing that this is your season of opportunity. God bless.